Well, we're going up in number, and our timing now is it's 1 minute past 10. So welcome everybody. It's great to see so many of you back again. And obviously we've got to top last session when we had the wonderful Amy from Flare with us. We've got a session this morning that will give us an update from James Wilson from the local authority. And I think that's going to be really helpful and interesting for our journey together over the next few workshops. We're going to hear from the wonderful Jane Friswell, who I will introduce in a bit more detail after James has spoken with us. And then we've got some action today where we're going to look at the pledges, and I'm really grateful for those of you who did do your homework. So all joking aside, it was great to see some people were able to respond, but really pleased that you're here if you weren't able to, because we know just what a busy time it is, and we don't want to miss the opportunity to work together on the pledges, because that can provide, when you get that revisit from Ofsted CQC, will be an update on the evidence base around co-production values and the implementation in practice. But it will also, just as importantly, give us an opportunity at the end of the session to think about the next 3 things that we can do. So in our individual and our practice roles, we can make change happen in Norfolk. And I think we got that feeling, despite all of us working virtually in the first session, of just this sort of big group of people who really wanted to make change in co-production occur, who wanted to refresh those pledges and make sure that we really do make change available to children and families in Norfolk. So I'm going to ask Amy if she wouldn't mind sharing her slides, but actually, James, I don't know if you've got slides or whether you just want to speak to the group and give us a bit of a welcome from yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. No slides. You'll be delighted to know. Probably there's quite a lot of slides coming, so I was going to just going to talk, so I can lead off as soon as you're ready.
Do you want me to? Yeah. Do you want to do your bit, James, and then I'll share Pat's slides after?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm not going to sort of lead a long discussion today. But I just wanted to spend a few minutes welcoming you all and sharing a few thoughts. So I'm James Wilson. I'm the Director of Quality and Transformation for Children's Services, a part of the Children's Services leadership team at the County Council. I'm the sponsoring director for the session around communication and co-production. So I'm here today in that role. But I'm also here particularly on behalf of all of the leadership team, just to sort of really emphasise how vitally important we see this piece of work, this agenda, and our commitment really to co-production as being absolutely essential if we're going to develop a system of support for children and families that really works in their interests. We absolutely believe that wholeheartedly. It is something we got highlighted in the Ofsted inspection, but I want to be really clear, we're not doing this because Ofsted told us to. We're doing it because we believe that co-production is the only way to deliver really outstanding services, particularly for children and families with special educational needs, but actually for all children and families. We see it as being a commitment to all pieces of significant work should be co-produced. And so I wanted to just sort of say that very simple message at the outset of today. And to know that everybody in the room has permission to work in that way, to put time and resource and energy into doing so, and actually to challenge. And that if people feel that we aren't co-producing significant pieces of work right across what we're doing in Norfolk, that we can challenge that and we can raise that right at the top with senior leaders to say that isn't right and we want to do things differently. So that's the mandate you all have from me today. In terms of my little input, if you can indulge me just for a few minutes, I thought perhaps the most valuable contribution I can make is an example from my past of doing co-production badly. I'm not going to tell you that I'm an expert in co-production because I'm not. Happily, we've got others on the call today who have expertise in that space. But a negative experience taught me a lot, and I think flipped around how I think about this. And so I thought I might just share that with you by way of an intro. So if you can picture me having started at Cambridgeshire Council as a graduate trainee quite a few years ago now, one of the first pieces of work we did was around children in care. And we thought we were co-producing it. We did what local officers too often do, which is that we worked as a group of officers to develop a series of ideas we thought could make things better, in this case for children looked after, worked them up quite a long way, got to the point of being pretty much ready to sign them off, and then thought, I know what we'll do, we'll go and hold some co-production sessions with children in care. And hopefully they'll tell us that our ideas are brilliant, and then that will be a further endorsement before we go live. And that ended up with me in a sort of youth centre in Cambridgeshire, with a group of children in care, pitching my ideas. I can't remember everything that I was sort of pitching that evening, but the first idea, and the one that's always sticks in my brain, was a simple idea, which is that we were going to try and get a sort of policy commitment in Cambridgeshire that no looked after child should be permanently excluded from school, and that was going to be policy. We were going to try and get all of the school system to sign up to that rule, if you like. And we thought that was sort of bound to go down a storm with the room, and who could challenge that idea as being a positive aspiration. And perhaps those of you who might work in that space might be ahead of me in how that played out. But they hated it. I introduced the idea as the first one, and the children in care hated it. And they hated it because it singled them out. It was one rule for most children in Cambridgeshire, and a different rule for children in care that made them feel excluded from the mainstream and not like everybody else. And their really clear feedback to me was, no, that's too much a feature of my life. I do not want to be defined by the fact that I'm a child in care. If there's a rule for most children, that should apply equally to us. And I suppose you could debate the rights and wrongs of that policy debate, but I suppose what I took away from it is that I had, in fairness, as a very new, quite junior officer, completely misjudged what it would be like to be a child in care. Had come at the work from a very different angle, albeit totally well-meaning, and developed a solution that really wasn't going to be what people wanted, and had started in completely the wrong place, really. So I just thought I might share that with you, because actually it then led to a much richer conversation about the experiences of children in care, actually some relationship building with some of the young people I met that evening, and an ongoing dialogue that in time made the piece of work we did, that's what I looked after children's strategy, much richer. And so I thought I'd share that with you, share my embarrassment that one evening. It stuck with me. It changed my way of thinking about what co-production should mean. It's a terrible example of what not to do, but nevertheless, perhaps that's a good place. And it's helped me through my career to think, actually, don't make that mistake again. Whatever you're doing, try to make sure that somewhere right from the outset, you've got the children and the families that you're working with at the heart of it, and that you're starting with what their views and aspirations and voices would be, and generally co-producing, not just doing what in that case was barely even consultation. So I thought I would just share that with you to kick things off. I'll just say again one more time, thank you for coming and for giving up your time to this really important piece of work. I'm happy to take any immediate questions if we've got them. Today I'm not able to stay for the whole session. My plan is to come for the whole session to the next workshop in the series. So I'm going to have to depart for a sort of COVID emergency meeting shortly, but I can stay for a few minutes more if anyone's got any immediate feedback or questions after that intro. Hope that was helpful, and great to see you all. Thank you.
It's really helpful, and actually, James, often we do learn through mistakes, don't we? And I think it's really appreciated that you've brought that honesty to the conversation, because in the first session, what we were really aware of is that we all bring ourselves to the table. And I've put in the chat box about the parable of the blobs and the squares, which I'm guessing that my friends from Contact and the Parent and Carer Forum will be familiar with. But it's exactly that sort of, realization I know I've had, where you're with someone and you have this dawning sense of, I've made some assumptions here, but actually you've really got a story to tell that will teach me and improve my practice. So really a good start to our day, and particularly to get that sign off from leadership, because it gives us all permission to act and to take this forward together. So thank you. Are there any comments or any, I know you've had a couple of comments from Jane, who's our key speaker this morning, very appropriate within the learning space we're occupying this morning. It is Jane. Anyone else want to come in? Okay, I think, thank you, James. Really value your time with us, and we're going to move on now to our slides, if that's okay with Amy. Thank you. And just
before you do, can I just say one last thing, which is if anyone either during or after the session wants to follow up with me afterwards, they're welcome to do so. I'm going to have to depart shortly this morning, but if anyone wants to pick me up offline, drop me an email, contact me on Teams or whatever, on this work or any aspect of it, then that offer is there. So I'll just say that as a last thing.
That's great, thank you. Thanks. Okay. So, thanks, Amy. I think we're okay to go straight on to slide 2, please. So, welcome everybody. It's great to see the numbers that we've got back again, and obviously we got some really lovely and helpful feedback from many of you after the first session. You know, I think you all found it thought-provoking, particularly when we heard from Amy from Fleur. And we felt it was important to follow on with that today through hearing from a parent and thinking about parents. We obviously could have thought of one of the parents in Norfolk, but we thought it'd be really helpful to think of a different perspective from someone else elsewhere in the country and enable the family voice colleagues to listen and be able to be part of that experience today. And after a session with Jane, we'll have a short comfort break, and then we'll move into group work, which is thinking about the implementation of the co-production pledges. And what we're hoping to get to is establishing our co-production principles and values through refreshing the pledges to guide that future collaboration and co-production together. So I'd like to move on to the next slide and welcome my friend and formerly my colleague. I still work with Jane too. Lots of you will know Jane already. She was formerly Chief Executive of the National Association for Special Educational Needs. I got to know her when she worked for the Specialist Schools and Academies Trust as one of the regional leads for SEND and inclusion. She's got a remarkable background in different roles, including as a teacher, special school head teacher, local authority officer. She's done virtually all of the things I can think of in our world of practice, but most of what she brings to me and the learning I've had from Jane over many years is what her values are and her family and lived experience, which is remarkable, and also is centred on this living an ordinary and a gloriously ordinary life. So welcome, Jane. We're really pleased that you're with us, and we can't wait to hear from you this morning.
Thanks, Pat. Wow, what an introduction, folks. Hey, it always feels a little bit daunting when Pat introduces me in that way, where she sort of substantially sort of bigs me up, and therefore sort of the level of expectation seems to get increasingly higher and higher. One of the things that I know I will enjoy this morning in sharing this opportunity to talk to you all, and not just about, you know, sharing my story, but also listening to your stories too, is that I know I'm amongst friends. I know I'm joining a community of colleagues, of parents, of families, of individuals that all have a story to tell that I know will resonate with some of the key messages that I'm about to talk about around achieving an ordinary life, and where co-production really is important in achieving that ordinary life through the family capital that we can bring to the processes and the values that co-production holds dear. So next slide, please, Amy. Thank you. So what we're going to cover in this session is exactly what's on this slide. We might go a little bit off-piste at times. I have a tendency to listen to both my heart and also my head when I'm presenting, particularly where I feel, just like James has done this morning, there might be part of a story that can actually bring a particular point to life. And I think that's important, isn't it, around lived experience and what we can learn from the lived experience of our parents, carers, families, children and young people locally must inform our local aspirations for change. So for leadership, such as James, to be honest and open in the way in which he shared the learning of working with young people who at that time were looked after by the local authority in Cambridgeshire, it's just such a gem, isn't it? It's such a little jewel, a little golden nugget. And I think all of those nuggets that we hold at local level actually do then go on to add to the overall capital that families and parents and carers and young people contribute to the life of a local area being highly responsive, highly aspirational. So the focus here is around expectations of us as families on our local leaders, and looking at, you know, how do I suppose that our aspirations locally and our leadership locally really contribute to, for me, a life beyond labels and diagnosis, and quite simply that ordinary life. We don't really want that much, and I'll come on to talk about our story shortly and our family too. I mentioned in the comments earlier on around, you know, that belief. If we have a shared sense of belief at local level, then actually what that develops into is a shared sense of the range of values that we hold dear, that is actually going to keep us on track to ensure that co-production continues to be an active dimension of all of the work that we undertake locally when transforming the landscape for SEND and our families and parents and carers and young people. And I think also don't ever underestimate the value of family capital, because, you know, we do have such an enormous amount of contribution to make to transformation, and meeting some of our expectations around local leadership for change, I think is key to that too. So next slide, please, Amy. Thank you. So let me introduce you to my family. And I'm sure my story will resonate with many of you this morning, but Pat's given me a brief introduction. I am steeped in the world of SEND, both professionally and also personally. I have a younger sister, Alison, who was brain damaged to the whooping cough vaccine at the age of 6.5 months, and she has a significant level of learning disability and also an adult diagnosis of autism, and is one of the great loves of my life. We are sisters first and foremost. She lives 40 minutes away from me in North Oxfordshire. I'm meeting you this morning from my home and base in Coventry in the West Midlands, but Alison and I talk regularly, maybe 3 times a week. She visits and stays with us, so I have a part-time sort of caring role because our 86-year-old mum is still fighting fit and creating as much chaos in our lives as she possibly can as an 86-year-old mum, thankfully. But Alison and my mum spend an awful lot of time together, but obviously because of advancing years, my mum also needs a little bit of support too. Now, I know that without the phenomenal upbringing, we didn't have a lot of money. My one working parent most of the time. I'm a child of 4, so I've got 3 siblings. But what I do remember from my upbringing is a real sense of determination that when Alison's diagnosis was made, that the vaccine damage that she'd experience was going to give rise to a lifelong level of disability. There wasn't a moment really, when I reflect back, where my parents were simply prepared to accept that the professional view at that time was to put her away for the sake of the other 3 children. And what that meant in reality was to actually place Alison in a long stay hospital from the age of 3, and to forget about her, because she simply wouldn't have much of a life. She was described at that time as very much a vegetable, which was a recognised term. She was described as ineducable, another recognised term within the late 1960s, early 1970s. So we're talking about the time at which special schools weren't even an entitlement to have access to special education for children and young people with additional needs. And I think one of the things that I learned from my parents, thankfully, was that that actually simply wasn't good enough, because of course, by the time I got to the age of, what was it, 36, I'd had my second child. And in fact, my husband Steve and I were following a very similar journey to that of my parents, in that we too now have a young person who's nearly 20, and Harry, who has additional needs, a level of learning difficulty, a diagnosis of autism, and some, at times, some pretty significant mental health needs too. And I'll come on to talk about him a little bit more shortly. So I'm here this morning with a range of different hats. So I've got 3 children, and my life has taken me into the landscape of SEND, I truly believe, born out of my earliest years experience of being a sister to Alison. So that advice back in the 1960s to put Alison away for the sake of the other 3 children that my parents received when Alison was probably about 18 months old, really is psychologically strong for me. I can remember the 3 very smartly dressed gentlemen that arrived at my parents' front door on the day that they were providing that advice. Clearly an assessment had been undertaken of Alison's needs, and they were here really to share that information. And we, the other 3 children, were ushered out of the back door of the house to go and stay with a neighbour. And that, for me, you know, as I'm approaching 60, still feels as strong an experience today as it did then when I was a child. But importantly, I think that experience, as much as I may not have understood all that was going on at the time, really inspired a sense of determination that was clearly sort of led by my parents at the time. Oh, thank you. I've got a cup of tea arriving, folks. I do apologise. Thank you. So the important thing to remember, folks, is that that part of my family's story is within my lifetime and is within the lifetime of many of you who are online this morning. And for me, that's a relatively short period of time that we've moved from a landscape of where putting children away for the sake of the other 3 was actually common practice, to now talking as a group of like-minded individuals this morning about the need to inform our transformation of services, of the offers of support that we make for children and families with additional needs, to really rely and focus on the principles of co-production. As Chief Exec of NASON, I was at the forefront of the arrangements that informed both the Children and Families Act and the SEND Code of Practice. So I'm very familiar with the legislative landscape, and I now run my own SEND consultancy, working with a whole range of different statutory and non-statutory partners too. But most of all, what I can tell you about my family is that we have a vision. And I'm sure for those of you, those parents and carers that are joining us this morning, you do too. And our family vision is a life beyond labels, needs and diagnosis, and it's simply achieving that ordinary life. And because the way I see it is that labels are for jam jars, they're not for people. And I've never really been that interested in labels. Even as a special school head, I wasn't particularly that interested in diagnoses, even though I would have families and parents who were. I'm not much interested in knowing what's wrong and what we call things, what we label things. I'm much more about how does my intervention tell us, you know, how can my intervention and support of a particular family, of a particular child and young person, of a local authority can truly make the difference that we're all aspiring to make. So living and breathing difference really is my way of life. And through that, I think I've come to understand that whilst I understand and tolerate and celebrate difference in my life and the lives of those that I love, the times when I've needed to access support for them and with them, for me, my lived experience of difference and my expectations of the support we needed was not necessarily always well matched or understood by those we were directed to for care and support. So I'm really interested with our family vision for the ordinary life that we're seeking for some of my extraordinary family members. They require open-mindedness, solution-focused people working with our family to achieve this. Next slide, please, Amy. So I think for many of us who have a disabled child or a disabled member of the family, we can suffer those sort of negative experiences of perhaps the focus being on tending to think about what we've lost and not perhaps what we've gained. And I think often there's a really strong sense of good intentions culture here, that we as families can be repaired, we can be treated, we can be supported. But often that's run at the risk of losing sight of the unique individual that we should be focusing on and keeping at the heart of all of what we do. And for me, that can often move us away from the ambition of achieving that ordinary life. So often that can lead to an existence, achieving an existence rather than a real life with friends and not paid workers, adding the real value to living that ordinary life which we aspire to. And a good example of that is Alison in the last couple of years wanted to attend an art class, a paint club, as Alison called it. And paint club, as we now know and love it too, was something that came out of the blue, but it was certainly an aspiration of Alison's that I wondered whether she'd got some latent sort of artistic hidden qualities that I perhaps had overlooked. And that really isn't the case, folks. Alison genuinely was interested in just knowing what paint club offered, and we facilitated, despite quite a high level of folks in Alison's circle saying, no, you don't want to do that. What's Alison going to get out of paint club? But we did. We pursued this idea, and with Alison, we found a local art club in North Oxfordshire near where she lives. And I have to say, they were phenomenally welcoming to Alison and her care worker at the time who accompanied her to paint club. And at a cost of something like £8.50, I think it's probably a little bit more now, a week, Alison got into the habit and enjoyed the opportunity of regularly attending paint club on a weekly, sometimes fortnightly basis. 2 years down the line, the benefits of the paint club experience is that Alison no longer needs a support member of staff to enable her to access paint club, because Wendy and Jean and Sheila, friends who she's made within paint club, pick her up and they take her to paint club, and often they'll meet up for lunch on a monthly basis, or maybe they'll go shopping together. So I think paint club isn't necessarily delivering what you and I might be looking for from a local art club, and that is to develop our artistic ability. Although I do have to say, Alison does paint during the course of the paint club experience. She does an awful lot of chatting too, but there is generally a product at the end of most classes, and I've seen her work. But actually, the real benefit for Alison is the reality that that experience brings and enhances her life, to grow her social circle, to practice those really important skills of developing new friendships, of learning to trust new people in our life, of learning about other people's experience in their lives. So, you know, that ambition around what constitutes a good life is founded on the basis of really valuing Alison's desire and aspiration to access Paint Club a couple of years ago. So that has led to achieving more of a real life for her rather than an existence. So there's no paid workers involved in her accessing Paint Club. It's simply, you know, a lady in her 50s accessing a local art class where she enjoys the value of what the class brings to her life. Next slide, please, Amy. So I think, you know, we've got to remember, haven't we, that a good life for a disabled person has much in common with a good life for any of us. And for us as a family, having that vision really does motivate us to pursue the good life for both Harry and also for Alison. So for us as families, we have big dreams that we want to pursue, both, you know, with and on behalf of our loved ones. And they bring with them a quite a high level of expectation. So I think for, you know, for many, many years, I can be known as Jane Friswell, but also I can be known as that bloody woman. And I think that may resonate for, you know, for some of you in the audience today listening. Because of course, sometimes it can feel a real struggle. Sometimes, and we often hear this, don't we, that parents and carers talk about the fight, and that isn't right either. We know that. So having those big dreams and also high expectations needs to be received locally in the spirit of co-production that says we too want to keep our expectations high. We want to enable you to feel that you have the appropriate support to enable you to make those important decisions about how you're going to achieve the ordinary life aspirations that you're wanting to achieve. And I think, you know, that piece of advice right at the bottom of the slide here always makes me smile, because I can remember the conversation many, many years ago. A good friend of mine said you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in people than you can in 2 years by trying to get people interested in you. And I think what that suggests there is the value on developing really high quality relationships with all key stakeholders, all key partners in the business of actually ensuring that co-production lies at the heart of everything that we do. So from our leaders, we expect a relationship building commitment, which over time will lead to that keystone of trust in all relationships. And that's how we become successful and effective in how we operate together and relate together. So from our leaders, we want a real sense of wanting to collaborate in the way in which James described this morning in his story. Special educational needs and disability is simply no respecter of disciplines or agencies. We know about multi-agency, we know about cross-agency requirements for support, because actually that's the life that we live. So our expectation is that social care collaborates with education and health and vice versa, and that you share your individual perspectives, but only do so in the ambition that a shared perspective of the family, the child, the young person, the adult you're engaged with is supporting your goal. So keeping that connectivity going is really important at local level, because if we don't have that connection with our local area who are offering support for families like mine and yours, then actually the really, really important work on improving outcomes for all of us, but particularly for our children and young people with additional needs, will become disconnected. So connections are really, really important. So relationships and connections with others are really what makes life good for all of us at any age, I suppose. And our local communities are often the greatest resource for developing social networks. And I think Alison's example of, you know, her aspiration to go to Paint Club is a good one there, about, you know, the benefits of that social connection We've had a comment, I think, in the chat box, which is around accessing a choir and the benefits of that. For years, I've talked about my husband's love of opera, where I'm not that big a fan. But actually, what I get out of going to see an opera in the days when we could do that, of course, is very different to what he expects from his evening or attendance at the opera. I enjoy going to the venue. I enjoy the drinks beforehand. I enjoy the social aspect. I don't necessarily enjoy the experience, of the performance. There's aspects of it that I really enjoy, but he does. So I think, we need to be really clear about the fact that some of those resources that exist within our local community have value at different levels for different reasons for different people. So from you, local leaders, we expect you to be good people, to do the right thing, people who share the qualities which inform and guide our lives, people who can offer, I suppose, a personal level of commitment to the relationship that you're going to develop with our family, and hold a deep belief that that relationship with us over time will add value to the quality of the lives of our loved ones. And also to have a really good sense of direction for the services that you're providing and for those that you're working with, and to ensure that those that you're working with are in fact heading in the same direction and not necessarily taking us off course. We need you to be authentic, folks. We need you to offer us that level of security that says, be open and honest with us, but actually do that with integrity. Don't offer us the moon and raise our expectations unnecessarily. Share our ambitions and help us shape our vision to secure the ordinary. And I think, in my experience, most families are looking to secure just that, an ordinary life for everyone involved. When Harry was 12, he shared with his father and I an ambition to live with us to the age of 37. Now, I have no idea to this day what the significance of the age of 37 was, or maybe even still is. She says, fingers crossed, not. But certainly Harry at that time had a 25-year plan to live with his mum and dad until the age of 37. What Harry didn't appreciate on that day at that time was that his father and I also had a 25-year plan too, where Harry didn't feature anywhere nearly as highly in our plan as we clearly did in his. Now, we can smile about that, we can laugh about that, but actually that was a really big wake-up call for us as parents, that we had this young person at the age of 12 with a fairly significant level of need, an education healthcare plan. There was a lot going on in his life at the time and therefore in ours. And yet his aspiration was to live with us to the age of 37. That can't be right. So I felt very much that we'd let him down. And I'm pleased to report, he's now nearly the age of 20. Well, middle of this year, he'll be 20. Harry's been in employment since the age of 16. And continues to be employed and is doing well. And through, I suppose, opening up the world of opportunity that employment has provided for him, his aspirations have changed significantly. So I'm really happy to report that his aspiration now is to set up his own home by the time he's 25. Again, I cross my fingers, folks. I think what happens when disability appears in your life as a family is that expectations shift. And I think societal sort of expectations about where people with a disability can be can also change too. Amy, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So for me, the principles of co-production featuring in family aspirations around managing expectations and aspirations at the same time needs to be reflected in what society can also offer us too. So I think in the early years of Harry's life, and maybe for parents and carers that are accessing the session this morning, this might ring true for you too, that there is a level of inequality that perhaps exists within access to certain services. I remember a really good friend of mine highly recommending Riding for the Disabled for Harry to access when he was little. And, you know, being a special school teacher for many, many years, I have taken many, many groups of children through to Riding for the Disabled sessions. And I have the enormous regard for the National Riding for the Disabled Association, but I didn't want that for my child. I wanted him to be able to access, you know, riding a horse locally, along with other children of the same age. I didn't need anything different. I didn't want anything different. So I think this propensity for services that are well-intentioned, and I genuinely mean that, I think they are operating in a true belief of the best of intentions. I think James referred to that in his, you know, the good work that he was doing in Cambridgeshire, he believed at the time, before he met with young people. It was born out of good intentions of doing the right thing. I think often the good intentions approach doesn't feature the principles embedded of co-production, where we need to be thinking about equality of opportunity, diversity of need, the accessibility to the range of existing services that all of us, you know, operate and enjoy. And also reciprocity too, which I'll come on to talk about shortly. So a lot of people sort of with a disability, that thinking, that Riding for the Disabled example sort of thinking and mindset, logically can lead us to think that a service for disabled people is the right and only service to be offered for people with a disability. For me, that's wrong, fundamentally on a number of different levels, and I feel that that's a real misplaced logic in our view that only devalues people's actual interests and desires to the point where sometimes they can often become irrelevant because we've determined the places where they can be, not enabled them to make the decisions themselves. So we've got to be super dedicated to the cause, haven't we, as parents and carers? And within our family, it's really, really clear that our pursuit is around attracting people to us that want to sort of keep on with the journey and join us and support us. And I suppose from local leaders, we would say, are you likely to be the people who will want to do that with us and support families like us? So we have to articulate our vision really well so that others may understand it and come on board to support us in our efforts to make the dreams for Harry and Alison that we have a reality for both of them. And I think it's fair to say that people will think that we are bonkers, and often do, and that's okay, you know, and that our expectations of the respective lives that Harry and Alison want to live and currently lead are unrealistic at times, but we don't. And I think that's important that we continue to dream big. So from us to you as local leaders, thinking about developing that shared vision. Next slide, please, Amy. We need you to not adhere to the fact that a set path is going to be the only option, because we feel that that set path approach is quite limiting. And I think the key question that all leaders should be asking and all service providers should be asking is, you know, will the choice bring the person closer to their desired outcome that they're identifying? So what does good look like for this particular family? What does good look like for this particular individual? And will the choice that they're making, that I'm facilitating, that I'm enabling, either as a service provider, as a local leader, you know, am I driving that? Am I driving that choice remains at the heart of the work that we're doing, to respect the views of the individual and to enable that vision for the ordinary life to become the reality. Next slide, please, Amy. How long have I got, Pat?
Sorry, Jane, I think you're okay for another 15 minutes, please. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's fine. So I think the questions really we should be asking around diversity of need with regards to our co-production approach locally. is that and this is exactly what we did for Harry, if we can bring people into his life through a work role, for example, when he was approaching sort of year 11 or even in year 10, actually, what would that look like? What, you know, who could it be? And what exactly is it that they could bring into his life that would enable him and us to achieve a better outcome at that particular point in his life? And another example of this is the fact that we recognised, and Harry was great at also enabling us to recognise this, and I think you'll immediately catch my drift here, folks, is that there comes a time in your child's life where you really simply don't cut it anymore as a parent. So actually, mum, as well informed and as knowledgeable and as experienced I am about the whole SEND landscape, I really wasn't a good fit for Harry at that point in his life. You know, year 10, year 11, he spent 19 weeks out of year 10 through repeated fixed term exclusions, to the point where he experienced some significant mental health issues and simply refused to return to mainstream education. We did get him back in, and that was only through the hard work and determination of both us as a family and also his school. We didn't always agree, and that's okay. But we needed to think about those people that we needed to bring into his life that could influence an improved outcome for him. And at that time, the one thing that really was a bit of a mainstay and a reliable support for him was his love of rugby and playing rugby. And at the time, he was a cracking little scrum half. And it was Rob, his rugby coach, that we looked to mentor Harry and to use his love of rugby and the context of rugby, of playing rugby, both on the pitch, training, the social aspect that the game brought into Harry's life, but to use that as a tool to really start to influence and enable Harry to adjust his mindset around his ambitions to gain employment, to finish school, to achieve, you know, the qualifications that he was hoping to achieve. So I think, you know, being really unequivocal about the diverse range of people in our children's life who are going to be often and sometimes a better fit than us as parents to support them at that particular point. And we call them the humps in the road in our neck of the woods, you know, in the Friswell household. So our questions are in line with our vision about, you know, who's best to support our young person, or, you know, Alison or Harry, about the life that they're wanting to achieve. I suppose questions for local leaders should also be the same. So are your questions in line with our vision? And are they about making the life the person wants? Programs and services, in our view, are simply not the answer. Programs and services may provide some funds, some supports, but they alone cannot result in the life that you want. And I have the privilege of working with many, many schools across the country over the, you know, the past sort of 10, 12, 15 years. And certainly what I find still to this day, that we have an approach in education where as soon as we identify any notion of a level of learning difficulty in a child accessing a mainstream school or identifying them as having a special educational need, special educational provision starts being arranged, and special educational provision or interventions and support programs often remove children from their mainstream classroom. And I think if we were to do a national tracking exercise of looking at the amount of time some of our children are spending out of the classroom rather than in, we will see that actually we're being quite exclusive in our approach in mainstream education, as opposed to being inclusive and promoting quality first teaching as being the prime offer in order to identify and meet the needs of all children. So I think for many of us, you know, those programs, services can supplant a life, and I think we need to be really, really aware of that. And sometimes, you know, like I've described for those children, people can end up having nothing else in their daily lives other than a program and a service. And I think where's the equality and diversity in that? So recognise, local leaders, that some of our values may differ from yours, and that's okay. Next slide, please, Amy. So accessibility is really important. We talked about that keystone of trust. You know, how are your services enabling us to sort of stay connected and to remain accessible over time? And never more so is that more pertinent given national lockdown and the implications of national lockdown for people that need to access those services. It was only on Monday of this week that I was talking with my sister Alison, who had been tracked and traced as having contact with someone who'd been tested for COVID-19 and received a positive result. So consequently, Alison had to be able to understand at her level self-isolation. Now, self-isolation for her meant staying in her own room, but of course, staying in her own room when she is so socially motivated was quite an anxiety making experience for her. So we had to look at what were the conditions for her on Monday and yesterday to ensure that anxiety levels remained manageable and fairly easy for her to regulate herself, whilst also meeting the commitment to self-isolation and all that brings with it. So there are real challenges, aren't there, here around how we can remain continually accessible over time. And I think, you know, keeping people connected and staying connected is absolutely the way forward to doing that, particularly at these trying times. Next slide, please, Amy. So an ordinary life for everybody involved. When we think about reciprocity, you know, we expect this, you know, give and take, this equal value of relationship and understanding of that relationship, that we all come. I am no better than you, you are no better than me. We all have equal value in our lives. And I think when I think back to the challenges of Harry being out of mainstream education for 19 weeks in year 10, I know that without the reciprocity requirements of the relationship that he had with his school, he was a very ambitious, outstanding, very large secondary academy, who really found the challenge of meeting Harry's needs challenging. But at no point did they say, you know, we don't want you anymore. Harry might have perceived it, that they didn't want to welcome him back. And unwittingly, I think they probably had done that at a key point in his life. But they had to work with us as a family to enable that mind shift to happen with Harry and for him to feel well supported in returning to school after 19 weeks away. So asking us to sort of lead and to inspire other families in adopting that visionary approach in securing an ordinary life, I think part of that reciprocity arrangement through co-production. And a good example of that is that certainly part of the setup arrangements for returning to school for Harry in year 10 is around the introduction of yoga into his life. And on a Monday morning, and in fact more often than that, when Harry returned to school, he wouldn't go directly to school on a Monday morning. He would access the local yoga class in the church hall at the bottom of our road with Jackie, the yoga teacher. He would sign in online, he'd register in online. There'd be a couple of school-related tasks that you'd need to complete before the yoga session started. He'd access the yoga session, he'd come home, he'd have a shower, he'd get his school uniform on, and then he would go to school. And the benefits of accessing yoga for him are still in place in his life today. So that added a real sense of independence in him learning how to better self-regulate and to also demonstrate how he could become much more reliable in perhaps more challenging situations that he was experiencing in his life as an adolescent, and all that brought with it. But interestingly, by the time Harry left school at the end of year 11, there was 17 other young people from his school that were also accessing Jackie's yoga class. The cost of that provision was £3.50 a week. I would have paid probably, you know, 10, 50 times more than that, because of the long-term benefits that accessing that provision has enabled Harry to develop into the young person that he is today. Next slide, please, Amy. So these are our expectations, really, of our family, and also this notion of how we can capitalise on what families can offer through our co-production pledges. So, you know, that personal level of commitment that we referred to earlier, that excellent sense of direction, of wanting to all head in the same direction, even though sometimes it may feel as a individual parent and carer that you're swimming against the tide. So being really authentic and being true to yourself and to the conversations, the relationships that you're having with local leadership, particularly at a time of transition and change, is really important here around how you utilise that family capital in some of the ways that I've talked about this morning. Next slide, please, Amy. Just conscious of time, folks. So, you know, act with that integrity that we talked about. Be super dedicated, which I'm sure you are, but be organised. How often do we, as family members, feel that sometimes we end up doing the job of others, of paid individuals? And I think, you know, sometimes the gifts and talents that we bring to the relationship that we're co-constructing with local leaders for SEND sometimes can feel a little bit like we're doing a little bit of the job for them. So I think being really clear about roles and responsibilities is good, but also there has to be an acceptance that sometimes we'll get a few blurry edges on that. And I quite like blurriness. I quite like things to get just a little bit messy, a little bit vague around how much support I need to offer, or how many questions I need to ask. And I'm okay with that, but be clear within your local area about, you know, the nature of leadership and how that underpins these co-produced and high quality family relationships that we're wanting to have. So think about how you can use your gifts and talents to shape the behaviour. So this again is talking about leadership, and we need people with those gifts and talents who can influence the attitudes of others, who perhaps are not as self-aware as James was describing his experience from when he worked in Cambridgeshire this morning to us all. Be organised, you know, because we have to be, don't we, folks? I mean, often it doesn't feel like that, but actually we're pretty good at being organised. And I think we're really, really the best people to know about the needs of our children and our families' needs. So, you know, if you need to have and capture exactly what your child's needs look like, then the best person to talk to often in terms of the pursuit of the ordinary life ambition is family, is, you know, their parents, carers, and indeed the young person themselves. So encourage us to contribute that, you know, to whatever the offer might look like for care and support. And remember that we want to be part of the solution, not the difficulty to be resolved. So that's going to require people who are phenomenally brilliant about bringing us in, communicating well, you know, valuing our contribution, and you know, achieving and aspiring to live that ordinary life, but sometimes having to use some pretty extraordinary ways and means. Next slide, please, Amy. So think about what that looks like for you. So take some time perhaps throughout your session today to think about what that looks like for you, for your particular group that you're representing, and think about also what the top 3 things might be that you can take away from this particular story that I'm telling you this morning that can affect a positive change, a positive difference for children, young people and their families. And what's next then really in your journey to securing and ensuring that co-production really does underpin the valuable work of Norfolk Send. And really happy to take any questions, folks, and hopefully able to provide some answers. So thanks so much for inviting me this morning. I hope that's been worthwhile listening to. I wish you all the very best in all the work that you do. And if I can be supportive in your endeavours in any way, as a friend, as part of your network, then count me in, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. I think you've offered us some challenges as well as some possibilities, and it was really, I mean, obviously I've heard about Harry and Alison before, and I'm really grateful to have shared in your story today. I wonder if there are any questions, and I can see a couple of things coming in the box. Would anyone like to ask or make a comment directly to Jane? Alison, you've said in the box that it really resonated with you. Programs and services instead of a life.
Yeah, I mean, in my past lives and different jobs, I've worked with people, young people and adults with special educational needs, and you know, we had so many creative ideas to really put together individual inclusive programs for people, and it was the little details that tripped us up and you know, stopped us from doing it. But we did some really good work, and you know, when you were saying about people having nothing else in their daily lives, they have programs and services instead of a life, that's so true. And you know,
just cutting up a bit there for me.
I think I froze up.
Yeah, I think you did.
Yeah.
But thank you. I think we got the gist of what you were saying, and I think I was very aware, partly because of Harry's age and Alison too as an adult. Just thinking about the different languages that we use in our different offers from children's to adults. So we go from that idea of an EHC plan and an annual review through to the idea of community-led support or small support. And I think some of that can sound quite scary, and I can't speak for parents on this call, but often we go for what we can see and is tangible, because it's quite difficult to see what that ordinary pathway could look like. And I wonder, you know, if that's one of the challenges, but also one of the opportunities with Norfolk being such a geographically diverse county. And I'd love to hear from some of the parents and carers. I know that they've been commenting in the box again. Need my glasses on. So we've got Claire, Nikki and Cheryl, Julie and Jill and Michael have all made comments in the box. Would anyone like to come in just to give some feedback directly to Jane?
I've done a polite pause. Michael here, happy to come in if people don't mind me going first. Just to underline what I've said in the chat really there. Hello, Jane.
Hi, Michael.
I've managed services for SEM for many years now, mainly in Norfolk, but in other parts of the country. And sometimes I'm leading our operational services, and at the moment, as I've done many times over the years, I'm leading our strategic change. And I strive to do this, but as I said last time around, it's always good to be reminded how to do it better, and never slip away from it. It's almost easier, I think, to do what I'm currently doing, which is always have co-production in the front of my mind when I'm doing big transformation services. We're building new special schools. We're trying to be more inclusive with our settings, schools and colleges, and to have people like Family Voice and other parents and carers in at that first meeting when we're talking about new models and new services is relatively easy. What I was just struck by from everything you were saying there was that we've got to make sure we're always putting as much effort into just doing the basics right, which is giving our frontline services, EHCPs and educational psychologists spring to mind in particular at the time for me, so that they've actually got the time to do what you've just asked them to do. Because I'm convinced that they want to and that's why they came into their jobs. But no excuse now, just fact. When you've got caseloads exceeding 350, you can't. It's literally impossible. So I just wanted to underline that, really, that, you know, we're investing 120 million pounds building things at the moment, and we've invested about £1 million in staff. Well, we need to clearly try to do much more on the latter. And just to explain, because sometimes I don't convey myself properly, my comment about your gently powerful presentation. It was powerful for all the reasons I'm sure it was obvious, but your approach, the way you've introduced this, doesn't scare someone like me. It brings me in, and that's really powerful.
Good. Thank you for that feedback, Michael. That's really, really lovely and really helpful for me as well as the deliverer. And I think, you know, it's the old checks and balances approach again, isn't it? You know, when we talk about that 120 million investment in buildings and a million in our people. And I think what local culture needs to be shifting to is that actually people matter most. And I think that sometimes is really quite difficult to spot. It's quite difficult to identify in some local areas for all the obvious reasons. It's not that people don't want to do this stuff, because it is difficult, it is challenging, because we talked back in the 80s and certainly in the 90s around the changing hearts and minds stuff around inclusion and the inclusion agenda at the time. And I think an enormous amount of really, really good work happened during that period. What happened was that it lost pace. So what we haven't been able to do is keep pace and keep supporting people at the right level to ensure that that people feel continually challenged, but equally really, really well supported and connected. And a good example of that is that when the SEND Code of Practice was revised in 2014, I was involved in all of that national work, you know, working as a strategic partner with DFE at the time. And many of the questions and challenges around the role of the SENCO were asked of NASON, the National Association for Special Educational Needs, who I was working for at the time. And conversations such as, how am I expected to meet 3 times a year with parents and carers of children with special educational needs? I simply, Jane, I've worked it out, I've done the maths, I won't have enough time to do that. And I think what we didn't do at that time was take a step back and think about some of the very natural and ordinary ways in which we engage with people, but actually offer us valuable opportunities to have a bit of a take stock point on progress and development, and to talk about all the really important stuff with parents, carers and young people. You know, you've got that young person in your school for 6.5 hours a day. You know, what more opportunity do you need to keep those conversations going? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the SENCO doing that. And in my view, it shouldn't be the SENCO doing that. So whilst the guidance was being felt like it was a bit of a prescription, you know, how it was perceived and understood was almost on that one level. We weren't thinking broadly about the inclusive community response that was needed to that guidance at the time in that particular instance. And I think the same can be said today, really, Michael, about some of the services and supports that families and carers may need and equally may not need too.
Jane, I think there's someone who's very keen to say hello to you. Lewis is up in my top right corner.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Lewis.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Jane. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Oh, tomorrow.
Tomorrow is his birthday.
Yeah.
Tomorrow. Oh, fantastic. Oh, I'm thrilled for you, Lewis. Many happy returns tomorrow.
Happy birthday for tomorrow.
25.
He'll be 25.
25. Oh, can I remember being 25, Lewis? I'm not sure. I'd like to think I can. Have a fantastic birthday. Happy birthday for tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you.
He's not excited, just...
Yeah.
Sorry, Jane, but I think you've officially been upstaged.
Oh, I don't mind being upstaged any day of the week, particularly from a young man like Lewis. So that's phenomenal. I'm so pleased it's his birthday
So
tomorrow.
Jane, your comments about where the legislation's taken us are resonant, aren't they? Because we know that there will be a revision of the Code of Practice. Andre Amick announced it at the TES SEN show over the last weekend.
Yeah.
We obviously have an SEN review that's underway, and I think that we also have some leaders like Stephen Chandler, who's the Adult Social Care Director in Somerset, who tells his staff to do what we should, not what we ought. And what he's saying there is, you know, sometimes we've got caught up with the plans, the reviews, the compliance, rather than the listening well. And obviously you don't want to get into, we can't get into any trouble as practitioners. You've been in those roles too. But Mark from the CCG, Mark Gower, the DCO, I think I'm right in saying, Mark, and nice to see you today. You've talked about trying to find that time to build relationships being key, and it's trying to get that balanced with all of the compliance that the law has brought to all of us in our different guises. So I guess then it means that we're working to values, because it might
does.
Michael can't be with every family, but if the values across Norfolk are embedded with Senkos, with teachers in special provisions, with key workers in the new pilots that we've got for avoiding admission to hospital, it's all of that we need to build together.
Well, it's a bit like, as I'm listening to you, Pat, it's a bit like the story of the cleaner at NASA, isn't it? You know, who was asked, you know, what's your job here? And she said, I help people to get to the moon. You know, so it's actually about, you know, at every single level of your institution, of your organizations, of your teams, of your families, you have to have that real common fertile ground that all of us are on the same mission, you know, that we're all going to get to the moon together. And so what are the ways and means in order to test that out at every single level, to ensure that you're being as robust, as, you know, full of integrity that I referred to earlier this morning, to be that values inspired whole local area team.
So I like that idea of going to the moon, but I did promise people a comfort break. So I wonder if now is the time to thank you, Jane, for really taking us further on our journey to Norfolk, the destination rather than the moon, and to great lives and great opportunities there. So I think we'll take a break and we'll come back. And Amy, we're going to go into groups then to look at those pledges that Norfolk came up with several years ago and think about how those values can enable us to work together. So we can look at what we do already, and then we'll be looking at what we can accomplish through some of our own promises too. So should we take 5 minutes? And I'm going to stay on time. And thank you, Jane. Really great.
Thanks, everybody. Really great to be part of your morning. And I wish you all the very best, and do feel able to stay in touch if you wish. Thanks again, Pat.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Okay, Amy, I think we'll take a break until 11, or a comfort break, 11:20. So if you can just be back in 5 minutes.
Yep, that's no problem at all.
Some nice feedback for Jane there.
Amy?
Kelly, I wonder if Amy has just taken the opportunity to go away from her desk for a few minutes.
Yeah, she might have done. I just thought it might be an idea at some point, maybe at the end of the meeting, just to let everybody know how we send the invites for the next one, because I think there seems to be confusion around people trying to book again through Eventbrite. So
Okay.
it's just a case of being sent the new link to the meeting a couple of days before the next one.
Thanks, Kelly. I
Yeah.
think me included. I think that I thought it was in my diary.
Yeah, because it'll be a new link each time.
Sorry, just had to pop to the loo.
No, that's no problem. We'll let you. So one of the things Kelly was just mentioning, Amy, is that we need to remind people about the new link for the next session and how to access that. So we can do that near the end.
Yeah, it's just Lorraine DeVere had sent me an email and I just picked it up, just saying that she's been trying to rebook it through Eventbrite. So I just thought it might be a good opportunity just to tell everybody that they'll get a new link for next time by email.
Okay.
I feel like I've just watched a really powerful movie.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I'm just sitting here just, wow.
I've known Jane for a long time, and obviously there are some common themes when she talks about her family life. So and also you can't see people, so I didn't know how it was resonating.
It was very emotional, very inspirational, and just reminding, just really powerful at reminding us what's important. And I was just able to link things to my life. It's just like, you know, with the yoga classes, for my daughter, it was horse riding. And, you know, once a week at school, she left for horse riding. If she didn't have that at the time in her life, then, yeah, we wouldn't be where we are now. And she still does it now. And we're talking over 10 years ago was when she started. It's just so, oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm sitting here like, you know, out from a movie, just now feel empowered.
I'm glad to hear it. I think one of the things that I like about it is when young people get to college years often, and there's a 3-day offer if you go to a general FE college, the local college, often that's a time that's quite scary, but actually it's a really good time to start trying some things out. And in Dudley, when I did some work with them a few years ago, a number of families had used that tool. You might have seen My Perfect Week, and you just put in across the week what children, young people are doing, and it really just shows up the gaps. And from those gaps, they started as families to say, well, let's get a WhatsApp group of young people who are. And these were young people that would be pre-verbal as well. They weren't young people who were like Harry, Jane's son, who went through a mainstream provision and took GCSEs. They were in a different place in terms of learning and their need profile. And they just started to do some free or low cost things together, a bit like the yoga, but they like to swim. And some of the parents were part of that, and some of them then would have a break. And then, of course, because there were a number of them, they were able to just start to commission some things, not sounds very fancy. Basically, they were able to say, well, actually, they love music. So together, we're going to just get like a little music group. There were some connections with musicians that had worked in special provisions that they'd been to. So over that period, they started to build what became a 5-day offer. And in Calderdale, my colleague and friend up there, Glenn Swindell, he's called Mr. 5-Day Offer. I think I mentioned him last time. I may have done, I can't remember, but Glenn's role is, he says that when you get to 14, you've got an EHC plan, he'll say, because he's a Yorkshireman, let's have a brew, and he'll come and have a conversation and listen to families. He's employed in adult social care, but obviously he starts to work with young people when they're in children's. And from that conversation and finding out what people are interested in, many more, I mean, to give it, Calderdale's a small borough. They had 5 years ago, 27 young people in ISPs, independent specialist college provision. They've now got 2, because with Glenn's role, they've been able to build a local life for young people that is meaningful and is connected to things like Project Search and Project Choice. so that they're starting to get into employment that might be part-time or volunteering, because it's, you know, not everybody is ready for work at 18, 25. And those things have begun to make a difference to the quality of what families say their life is, as well as for the local authority having quite a big impact on the high needs block overspend that they had, because they had 27 young people placed in out of authority places and they're down to 2. So, you know, listening properly can save us as well, but most of all it can save our families some of the anguish of where's the best place, what's the next destination. Anyway, that was just the break. That wasn't even any slides, that was just me going off on one, because Natasha said that she felt inspired and like she'd watched a great movie with Jane. Welcome back, everyone, and sorry that if you caught me in mid-flow, but if you ever wanted to talk to Mr. 5-day offer, Glenn Swindell, then he's well worth a conversation with. Amy, can we show the slides just to direct us to our next activities? Is that okay? Or Kelly, could be you. Thank you. So I just looked on your website and obviously took into account that some people might have re-signed, like Michael told us he had, but there were 150 names signed up to the pledges, and I asked a little bit about where they came from and how old they are. So I think that probably today is an opportunity for you to give your voice when we go into groups, to say, do they remain the best way for you to ensure co-production in Norfolk? They do resonate as values to me, and a bit like motherhood and apple pie, there aren't statements there that you would disagree with. So I'm not suggesting that you need a change. I'm just asking you the question openly, is that going to be your continued approach? And the way we'd like to move on into this final part of the session is to go into groups, and we'll have our parent leaders. And I'm using that term deliberately because I think from our session with Jane, we've seen that leadership, the values that we want, we can get that from family voice. It was very apparent. I've said to you in the last session that I could almost read and feel that when I read the Ofsted CQC inspection report. And that leadership works alongside the other leadership throughout our children's and adult services in Norfolk, in the local authority and in health. So it would be great if in our groups we can do 2 things. We've got the grid that you've seen, and some of you have completed, really grateful for that. But how are the pledges currently implemented, and how can we demonstrate that? Because I think it just helps us to know what's tangible, what is happening. And the second part of our conversation, nearer to the end of our conversation for group facilitators, what 3 promises will we make personally to implement the pledges in our day-to-day role as a parent leader, as a service leader or a service practitioner? So, Amy, I think you're going to move us into groups, and we're going to stay in the groups we were in last week, ostensibly.
Yes, hopefully that's going to work. So I'm going to send everyone to breakout rooms. Pat, what time do you want them to come back so that I know when to press the button to bring them back?
Would be good. Then we've got 25 minutes, so we've got maybe
Fine.
15, 20 for the conversation and 5 minutes for our own pledges that we could write down or put them in our phone.
Fine. Right, I will try and send everyone now.
Thank you. Can I ask any of the parent facilitators just to give us a flavour of the conversation that you had in your group? It didn't feel like long enough. Natasha?
Yep, I'll start. I would just, a flavour of the conversation was that we need time. We need time to talk with the services, and leaders need time to talk together in their teams. They need the time to be able to talk to the families, the young people, the children, so that we can really get a sense of how to provide a committed pledge, a committed vision and value. And it seems to be that a lot of reflection is definitely taking place. A very powerful statement was said about not everyone, not all services and experts and leaders stop thinking that they are the experts in all of this, and we need to think about the children and young people. Likewise, as parents, when they get older, I said we need to stop thinking we're the expert for our child, and then we need to pass it relevant to who knows best for what outcome and aspiration our life is needed. We had a in our group, all members were very committed about wanting to explore the best practical ways that these can become a reality, and that we can work together with the family, the services, to make the best fit and aspiration for the child. But we need to think about it realistically, and what will actually be available and what will work and what is there to find the best match for that child and young person's needs. So, but I would like to just say one thing. A few of, well, more than half the group hadn't actually received the homework or realised. So we did a lot of thinking off our feet and sort of getting straight in. So maybe that's just something we need to think about. But thank you.
Thanks, Natasha.
Oh, apologies if people didn't receive it. It was sent out with the slides after the first workshop. So we sent out both the presentations from the first workshop and the pledge at the same time. So apologies if people didn't receive that. If they can let us know if they didn't receive those slides after the first one, that would be great, and then we can get those sent out.
Okay. Tracy or Nicola, do you want to come in from your group? Can't hear you, Tracy.
Never enough time, and I begin to think that that Natasha had more time in her breakout room than what we did, because she seemed but yes, a commitment from my group, and you know, one lady was saying about she was going to do an external audit to just see what they do. That seemed a really good idea, and that, you know, it's not easy, because if it was easy, everybody would be doing it already. So we can't underestimate the amount of time and effort this will take. Other than, you know, just think of that ordinary life. That's what we want. We just want ordinary lives. We don't want anything different to anybody else. You know, I spoke about, and I don't know if I did speak about last time, about the direct payments, and the fact that have I spoken to the group? I know I've spoken to Pat about it.
Just,
you know,
to me, I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that we as a family wanted somebody to do my housework and my ironing, because we absolutely love Lewis. Obviously, we loved going out with him, we loved doing all of that sort of stuff, but it was the housework that was just getting on top of me, and that was what wasn't working for our family. So we managed to get a cleaner who came in. It was a lot easier to get a cleaner than it was a PA. So that works for our family, and that was thinking outside of the box, you know, listening to a family, listening to what they wanted and needed, and actually, you know, it wasn't easy to get, but we did it because that was what was the best fit for our family. And I think that in the group came across. You know, if you listen to the parents, you actually listen to what they want, and you know, there's not many things that can't actually happen. You know, so I think that came across. But yeah, everybody was going to go away and do their homework if they hadn't done it. So yeah, it was a good session.
And I would say alongside what Tracy is saying, we're talking about time, and it's not an easy thing to do, and it's, you know, it's going to take a lot of time and effort. But we had also had the conversation about that actually it can be more efficient, because what happens at the moment is weeks and months of work are spent putting something together, whether it's a document or whatever it may be, and then it's presented to Family Voice or to whoever for their feedback, and then they feedback, and then sometimes if the feedback is that's no good and it's not working and it's not what families want, that work has to start all over again. So actually, whilst it will take a lot of time and effort and all of that to fully co-produce, what we save in time in producing stuff that we then send out, that we then have to do the work again, there's the flip side of that too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think Michael will remember when Nikki came into he's nodding his head. Nikki came into the service and she'd written a wonderful survey for parents, and it had taken her, she told us how long, days and days to get, and we just looked at it and said, no, you know, this is not going, this can't go out, parents won't fill it in. And we worked together and we came up with a document. But had she got with us first and spoken to us first, we would have given her that direction that she didn't need to spend days and days writing that, because that time was wasted. So a really good way of showing that co-production really does work and saves time and saves money.
So I'm looking at time, and although I wanted to invite more people in, I think one of the comments in the box from Jackie, chat box, is more time will be good in the breakout rooms. And I do think in session 3 next week, we do need more of that time now, because what was clear in the group I was with was that the pledges were of their time, but the language of services, for example, after we'd heard Jane this morning and Amy last time that we met, just seemed to be a bit out of date, and there was some really good values within those pledges, but they were written in professional speak, as I think the group described. So I think we've got an opportunity in the next 2 sessions to use more of our time together in groups to try and do the hard bit, because if it was easy, everyone would be already doing it, which is how do we actually make co-production work on a day-to-day basis. And I think some of that is, for example, having looking at your work streams or your activities around the written statement, and having a sponsor, member of parent voice, family voice, sorry, who might be the link for you. So John was talking about, you know, the vision team, and the special needs teaching teams could have one link that is a champion for them, and then I can check things with you around information, because sometimes we need information, consultation, co-design and co-production. There are different aspects of what we want to do together, I think, that we could begin to plan for in a different way. And what I think there is a real appetite in Norfolk to make that happen. So it's the how-to that we perhaps need to think about more in the next 2 sessions, as well as capturing, because some of you have sent it in and some of you want to look again at the grid because you didn't get it first time, the information about what we already do well, because we don't want to lose those things that you do really well around co-production in Norfolk. So I'm obviously just going to invite any short call out now if you think we've missed anything today, but we've heard now from a young person and from a parent, and that's been a really great start. There's plenty more that we could hear and do together. But does it sound sensible to you now to be thinking about looking again at the way that those co-production values inform practice in Norfolk? So we've got a bit more of a roadmap that we share together, and language that is communally used across the different families, agencies and parts of the Norfolk community.
And something that
breaking up, Nicola.
You sound very interesting, a bit like sharing
as well, was that this parent, but sorry, any better now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Don't worry.
Sure.
Oh, okay. In our group, we talked about how it was great. Oh, I'll take my face off. Is that any better?
Yeah, go ahead.
No. Oh yeah, okay. So we talked about how it was great that the speaker was both a professional and a parent, but that many parents you know, are not coming from a place where they already understand the language, where they already feel equal with the professionals who are speaking to them, and that business about engagement and relationship is so key to, and the personal is so key to any of this working, really.
Absolutely. And I think, Nicola, you're getting some synergy from practitioners who are saying some very similar things, that and also about being respectful and taking time, because relationships and respect are key drivers that are coming through here as well. So I'm just going to draw us to a close. There's so much more we still need to say, and Cheryl's reminded us about those who've got different first languages as well as English as an additional language. We're going to be back on the 27th. We always do. The group of planners from Family Voice will reflect on what we've heard today and what we've achieved. We will send you the pledges again in the grid if you'd like to send that back to Amy. That would be really helpful. And any other thoughts, anything that you'd like to see in the next 2 sessions would be welcome too. And just a reminder that you do need to rebook through Kelly to attend the next session. It's not an Eventbrite booking, it's just to register through the Zoom connection.
You don't need to rebook. What will happen is the Monday before, Kelly will send out an email that will have a link in it, and you need to register. And the reason you need to register is because that's the only way we can make the automatic breakout rooms work.
So thank you, everybody. I've passed your thanks